Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Essential Libertarians. Today we have a debate. I'm your host, Kareem Mays, and I will be moderating today. We have Insanity is Free and Harrison Wells of the Mises Caucus. Insanity is Free, Jeremiah Harding will be arguing from the point of an agorist, talking about is political action necessary or not. He'll be arguing from the negative, and Harrison from the Mises Caucus, who is an Ancap, will be arguing from the positive. We're going to get their opening statements in, and then we're going to have a little bit of back and forth. We want to determine in this debate, is political action necessary to defeat the state, or should we use other means or a combination of both? I'm super excited to host this, and I'm looking forward to getting some good discussion, good replies. I'll just say before we start, neither of these parties think the state has any legitimacy. So what we are arguing is not if the state is legitimate or if it should exist, but what tactics we should use to decentralize it and how that would be done. So with that being said, Harrison is going to be arguing for the positive. So I'll let Harrison get his opening remarks in, and then we'll move to Jeremiah from Agorist Nexus.
All right. So hello, everybody. I'm Harrison Wells, and as you just heard from Kareem, I'm pretty involved with the Libertarian Party, and including the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus, and I'm going to be arguing on behalf of why libertarians should be involved in electoral politics. Now, I don't actually think that the full solution to liberty is going to be getting people elected, and I certainly don't think that getting people elected at the federal level is an efficient method of having liberty, and I do not think that politics should be the main focus of the liberty movement or the only thing we do. I'm not against agorism, counter-economics, direct action, or anything of the sort. I am arguing we should not completely abandon politics and the electoral process. And this is primarily for two reasons. The first is local elections and nullification. So if you can get people elected to local office, specifically to local executive offices, such as sheriffs and mayors, you can nullify federal and state laws in a way that increases people's freedom. I view this as a legitimate, valid, and effective way of promoting liberty because winning local elections is a completely achievable goal. And unlike this, I do not view voting as inherently violent. I essentially take Spooner's view that it's completely reasonable to vote in self-defense. It is not aggression to choose the lesser of two aggressions. And you are only you can only be held responsible for your own actions. So I'm not responsible for the negative action of whatever politician I vote for. If I am a voter in a constituency and have been placed in the position by the state where I am better off choosing the lesser of two evils, no matter how wrong that lesser of two evils may be. So ideally, I would like to vote for aggressively libertarian candidates at the local level and make free communities. But basically, I don't view voting as illegitimate or a violent action. So voting in people at the local level to nullify gun laws, drug laws, certain immigration restrictions, this is a valid way of making people more free, which is always the goal that should be kept in mind. As libertarians, we view aggression as fundamentally evil, and our opposition to aggression is the basis of our our political system because it's the basis of our morality. And so by reducing the total amount of aggression perpetrated by the state, we have made a positive change, which is why local elections are a legitimate method of making a freer future. My other case for why politics is valid is for outreach. So Jeremiah is an agorist and would advocate for counter-economics, and counter-economics can make individual people more free. The issue with certain counter-economics and direct action is that they don't produce a free society until the amount of people partaking in them reaches a critical mass. So if you're simply working on your own with your side hustles through black markets, the state will stamp you out. But if the amount of people participating in that process reaches a certain mass, then it becomes an effective way of making not only yourself more free, but the whole of our society. So to make those tactics effective, fundamentally the challenge is to bring in more people. And we've seen in our lifetimes that the best way the liberty movement has to bring in more people is national level politics. I would challenge anyone within the liberty movement to say that liberty in America would be in a better place today without the Ron Paul campaigns of 2008 and 2012. If Ron Paul did not run, thousands of people who today believe in liberty would not. And without them, our movement would be weaker, not only on a political level, but in every aspect. Any sort of mutual aid is weaker with less people. Our black markets are weaker with less people. So by working on the national level to get our message out there, we bring in more people. And by bringing in more people, we make the liberty movement stronger. And that makes all methods more viable. And that'll be it for my opening statement.
Yeah, that was really good. Thank you, Harrison. And remember, the just energy of the Ron Paul campaign was exciting. All right. I'm excited for Jeremiah's opening statement, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he has to say.
Emma Goldman famously said that if voting changed anything, they would make it illegal. Never has that been proved with any greater level of success than the most recent campaigns in the US. No matter what alleged choices were offered, the end result has been the same. The system proceeds as normal, with very little, if any, change for the better, and much more change for the worse, by magnitudes of scale. Meanwhile, libertarians, or at least people who call themselves that, have been losing nearly every single time, especially on the presidential scale, where what was considered a landmark victory for the LP was a Gary Johnson campaign in 2016 with just 3% of the fucking vote. Meanwhile, the party has been steeped in crisis after crisis and scandal after scandal, constantly shifting around leadership like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. But it's nothing new. This party has been failing and flailingly cloying for leadership since the 70s, where its doomed start created the fertile grounds for every bit of hijacking which has happened since. And there has been much. One of the most noted thinkers to write about these compromises was Samuel Edward Konkin III, who wrote in the New Libertarian Manifesto about how the original LP and many other libertarian organizations were already bought by billionaires like the Koch brothers and sold out to state capitalist interests. He wrote, "The libertarian movement looked around and saw the challenge everywhere, our enemy, the state, from the ocean's depth past arid outposts to the lunar surface in every land, people, tribe, nation, and individual mind. Some sought immediate alliance with other opponents of the power elite to overthrow the state's present rulers. Some sought immediate confrontation with the state's agents. Some pursued collaboration with those in power who offered less oppression for votes. And some dug in for long-term enlightenment of the populace to build and develop the movement. Everywhere, a libertarian alliance of activists sprang up. The state's higher circles were not about to yield their plunder and restore property to their victims at the first sign of opposition. The first counterattack came from anti-principles already planted by the corrupt intellectual caste: defeatism, retreatism, minarchy, collaborationism, gradualism, monocentrism, and reformism, including accepting state office to improve statism. All of these anti-principles, deviations, heresies, self-destructive, contradictory tenets will be dealt with later. Worst of all is partyarchy, the anti-concept of pursuing libertarian ends through statist means, especially political parties. A libertarian party was the second counterattack on of the state unleashed on the fledgling libertarians, first as a ludicrous oxymoron, then as an invading army. The third counterattack was an attempt by one of the 10 richest capitalists in the US to buy the major libertarian institutions, not just the party, and run the movement as other plutocrats run all other political parties in capitalist states. The degree of success those statist counterattacks had in corrupting libertarianism led to a splintering of the movement's left and the despairing paralyzation of others. As disillusionment grew within libertarianism, The dissolution sought answers to this new problem, the state within as well as the state without. How do we avoid being used by the state and its power elite? That is, they asked, how can we avoid deviations from the path of liberty when we know there are more than one? The market has many paths to production and consumption of a product, and none are perfectly predictable. So even if one tells us how to get from here, statism, to their liberty, how do we know that's the best way? End quote. My answer is that we don't. And the point about the party having been bought is an extremely important one, because that's how politics really works. For instance, $9.3 billion is the projected amount to be spent on electoral politics in 2022 for the midterms alone. Many more billions are spent on a regular basis by the billionaire class in an attempt to sway politics to their particular persuasion. At least that's what they would have us believe. There's an argument to be made that the entire thing is a puppet show of the elites, and that those with the purse strings are funding pre-planned scenarios to ensure their victory regardless of any input from any external source, including the self-defensive people. It's been repeatedly proven, however, that at the very least, those who hold the purse strings control the result. Open Secrets regularly covers the fact that the vast majority of elections are selected by those who have the money, and the candidates that spend the most are going to get in. Imagine all that money being spent on actually improving things, like libertarians claim they will. Imagine how much better we could do, and how ineffective the competition would seem by comparison. It's an inherent problem to rely on existing control mechanisms as a method of reducing existing control. It is not only futile, but it is counterproductive. But this problem wasn't even new in the 70s, and a man who valued liberation around the time of Marx, Bakunin, was removed from his position in an alleged union and accused of being a spy for even suggesting total liberty with no compromises and no transition period, which is inherently doomed. Now, since this is a quote from him, now since the bourgeoisie, by virtue of their economic and political privileges, are so far removed from the people, how can their governing and their laws truly express the feelings, ideas, and will of the people? It is impossible, and daily experience demonstrates that in the legislative and all other branches of government, the bourgeoisie is primarily concerned with promoting its own interests and not the legitimate interests of the people. True, all district officials and legislators are directly or indirectly elected by the people. True, on election day, even the proudest bourgeois officials, office seekers, are forced to court their majesty, the sovereign people. They come to the sovereign populace, hat in hand, professing no other wish than to serve them. For the office seeker, this is an unpleasant chore, soon over, and therefore to be patiently endured. The day after election, everybody goes about its business. The people go back to toil anew, the bourgeoisie to reaping the profits and to political conniving. They seldom meet and never greet each other till the next election, in which the farce is repeated. Since popular control in the representative system is the sole guarantee of popular freedom, it is obvious that this freedom is wholly spurious. End quote. You see, transition periods will always fail, because using the power structure capabilities will only ever empower the power structure to continue its capabilities as they were. If one's idea of liberty is to get alleged libertarians in the same position which enslaved us all to begin with, we will get at best stagnation and at worst decline. And the power structure operates as it always has, where it continues to enslave us, but this time with a libertarian veneer, to be blamed for everything that goes wrong until people beg for a return to normalcy. I'm sure there will be much to discuss in the coming debate, but I wanted to get that out there to just bring up the fact that party politics has been failing anyone with a vaguely libertarian slant for fucking centuries, and failing the American people for half a century on its own. It was bought by conservatives, alienates leftists, guts the actual momentum of liberty, and spends a ton of money which could be spent on literally anything else, like solving the problems that libertarians claim to want to solve, that might actually get people to believe they give a shit about solving these problems, rather than padding a career of politics with a bunch of useless and empty rhetoric while everything fails to the libertarian test. Especially so when the party alienates one group of people based on one type of identity politics, and other groups compete to alienate the rest of them. For a party which claims to care about liberty, this party has done everything in its power to convince people it could serve the interests of history's biggest threats to that self-same liberty, by being bigoted to one or more groups or by sacrificing certain principles in order to keep people on board. The truth is, liberty is not a compromise solution, and it's high time we take it and stop asking for permission. The state is a gigantic tyranny machine, and pretending it's anything else is an exercise in futility and counterproductivity. Instead, we should be forming mutual aid networks and direct action networks in order to solve these problems manually, seize our liberty, and then defend our spaces in the way the founders failed to defend it. That's it.
I like it. Those were both really good opening statements. And I actually found Emma Goldman from Michael Malice's book. Recently been taking a look at Bakunin as well, who was a rival of Marx, who did warn, very rightly so, that this transition period would not work. And if the proletariat just become the bourgeoisie, then they lose the interests of that selected class, because now you've essentially just replaced one ruling group with another. So
like a warlord.
We'll get into that a later time. But I would like to give Harrison a little bit of time to do some rebuttals. Also, if you want any historical context on Bakunin or Emma to make a point as well, I can provide that.
No, I'm fine. I've read enough Bakunin and Goldman. Well, not enough, but enough to know what I'm talking about here. I'll read more someday. Okay, so the crux of my argument here would be that Jeremy made a very strong argument against certain points within the LP, a less strong argument against political action in general. So first of all, the Caucus is a problem for the LP, and it was a problem for us for a long time. But the LP is not unique in that respect, as Jeremiah admits himself. All libertarian institutions were consumed by this sort of moderate center-right force that came through us. That's not necessarily unique to the political system, and I don't think that the only reason we were infiltrated was because we were within the political system. Any liberty movement that is powerful enough to be effective will result in attempted infiltration by, the so-called moderate libertarians who are really just neoliberals and are effectively subverters. There is no the moment a liberty movement becomes powerful enough to genuinely threaten the state, it will be attacked by the Caucus. That's just how it's going to work. This is not an issue that's unique to the LP or even unique to politics. If I think like the Caucus has attempted to hijack not explicitly political parts of the liberty movement, such as the Free State Project, which has its political elements, but much of the Free State Project is built around, mutual aid and black market principles of people simply trying to build libertarian communities. And the Beltway libertarians have tried to hijack that too. So this is not something that only happens to the LP. I would also... Okay. Also, I'm not arguing that we will make a freer future by electing libertarians to federal office. And I would not personally be satisfied with the existence of a state full of elected libertarians. I would make the case that to some extent we've had that before in America, and it's what got us where we are now. Electing libertarians is not about creating a transition period where those libertarians can degrade the power of the state. That is not what I advocate for. Electing libertarians is about bringing more people into our movement so that the power of the state is eroded by the consciousness of the people who are being ruled. And that is not that's not me advocating for a transition period. The method is we wake everyone up, and then once enough people are awake, that's how we defeat the state. So I don't think we're going to elect libertarians to federal office who will then implement libertarian policy that will then make a more libertarian country. That's not a thing that's going to work. The point of the electoralism is simply to bring people over to our side, which is part of why I'm not a fan of like the paleo strategy. Like I don't care about really electing liberty Republicans. Some of them are good and some of them are good at bringing people in, but they don't like pass laws that make us more free. That's never going to happen. I think probably the best argument Jeremy made was that money that is spent on the political process is money that could be spent elsewhere. But I'm not sure it completely follows. And what I mean by that is that I'm not sure that you can simply look at all the money in the liberty movement and say some of it's being spent on things Jeremy likes and some of it's being spent on politics, and we should simply spend the things that are spent on politics on agorism, direct action, mutual aid, all that sort of thing. And because we can't really say that that's a thing that would happen. The liberty movement is still somewhat reliant upon the one transition period that I will defend is the transition from blue-pilled to red-pilled libertarian. And we are still somewhat reliant on libertarians who maybe don't hate the state as much as we do, who don't understand agorism, mutual aid, and direct action, and would never spend their money there. And the one involvement in liberty that they could ever actually have is with the LP. And so for those people who maybe don't buy in all the way, politics provides an entryway for them. And so they spend their money, they spend their time on politics, and then as they understand more, maybe they transition to a more direct action focused sort of plan where they're spending their money more in that way and less like doing things like donating to the Libertarian Party. But for some people, that's their only involvement. And for the majority of people in the liberty movement, that's how they start out with these ideas. So we throw that away at the risk of losing everything that got us where we are. Once again, there are probably tens of thousands at a very minimum of libertarians who would not be in the liberty movement at all if it wasn't for Ron Paul. And so if we get rid of that, if we abandon politics entirely, that weakens every other method we follow because it simply does not have the critical mass to seriously damage the state. Yeah, okay, that's pretty much all. I would also argue that debating the merits of the LP is a different debate from debating the merits of political action in general. And I'm a member of the LP, but I understand some people's complaints about it. I would just say that criticisms of the Libertarian Party and its history are not effective criticisms of libertarians engaging in the political process.
Yeah, that was good. I like that. Also, one thing I'd add is if we're going to criticize the LP, that's okay. But I think there's a fundamental differentiation from the current, the Mises Caucus, current LP leadership, and then the old one. So to me, we could specify that as well. What would be your rebuttal to that, Jeremiah?
Can I jump in there on the Mises Caucus point?
Yeah.
I would honestly, like everyone knows I'm a member of the Mises Caucus, but I'd say we wait and see on that to some extent. Like I like what I kind of like the direction the messaging's gone so far. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was. But like part of the reason I do have some pride in being an LP member and working with the LP is that there are of our history. Like we're the party of Ron Paul. We were the party of Harry Brown and Michael Badnarik, and those are all good men who advocated for real liberty and also got absolutely nowhere. So while I like that the party is more pure, I'm going to hold out and see on whether the Mises Caucus is the answer. I think this is something worth trying, but I don't know if the Mises Caucus is the liberty movement's inroad into politics per se. My only argument is that abandoning politics entirely seems counterproductive.
Okay. What would be your rebuttal to that, Jeremiah?
Well, I haven't seen any actual meaningful challenge to the Coctopus from Mises Caucus yet. We'll see if that happens, but actions speak louder than fucking words, as always. So, speaking of words, here's more words from that book. The first Libertarian Party was set up by Gabriel Aguilar and Ed Butler in California in 1970 as a hollow shell to gain media access. Aguilar, a Galambosian, was staunchly anti-political. Even Nolan's LP was mocked and scorned by such as Murray Rothbard in the first year of its existence. The Libertarian Party, which eventually organized nationally and ran John Hospers and Tony Nathan for president and vice president in 1972, was first organized by David and Susan Nolan in December 1971 in Colorado. David Nolan was a Massachusetts YAFer who had broken with YAF back in 1967 and missed the 1969 climax in St. Louis. He remained conservative and minarchist right up to his first edition. Although the Nolans were rather innocent, and other early organizations and candidates often so, the debate on the party question began immediately. New Libertarian Notes attacked the New Libertarian Notes was a magazine he ran that was like precursor to the book. New Libertarian Notes attacked the LP concept in spring of 1972 and ran a debate between Nolan and Konkin just before the election. By 1980 presidential campaign, the Nolans had broken with the LP leadership of Ed Crane and his candidate, Ed Clark, who ran a high-powered, high-financed, traditional vote-chasing and platform-trimming campaign. Charles G. Koch, Wichita oil billionaire through his relatives' foundations, institutes, and centers, bought or set up or bought out the following from 1976 to 79. Murray Rothbard in his Libertarian Forum, Libertarian Review for Marbert Keppert, edited by Roy A. Childs, Students for a Libertarian Society, SLS, run by Milton Mueller, Center for a Libertarian Studies, Rothbard Leaning, and Joe Pedden, Inquiry edited by Williamson Evers, Cato Institute, which, by the way, started out as the Koch Institute, so, you know, and various Koch funds, foundations, and institutes. Named the Coctopus in New Libertarian 1, February 1978, it was first attacked in print by Edith Ephron in the conservative libertarian publication Reason, along with allegations of an anarchist conspiracy. The movement of the libertarian left cut away from Ephron's anti-anarchist ravings and rushed to support her on her key revelation of the growth of monocentrism in the movement. In 1979, the Coctopus took control of the National Libertarian Party at the Los Angeles Convention. David Koch, Charles's brother, openly bought the VP nomination for $500,000. Murray Rothbard broke with the Coctopus soon after the 79 LP convention, and most of his close allies were purged, such as Williams and Evers of Inquiry. CLS was cut off from Koch funding. The Libertarian Forum began attacking Koch. Rothbard and young Justin Raimondo from antiwar.com, for those of you who don't know, rest in peace, set up a new radical caucus of the LP. The first one, 1972 to 74, was run by progenitors of NLA as a recruiting tactic and to destroy the party from within. Although Rothbard was moved to ask, is Sam Konkin right in his July 1980 speech to an RC dinner in Orange County, the RC strategy is to reform the LP using New Left and neo-Marxist tactics. So basically, the thing that the Mises Caucus is trying had already been done and failed. So ultimately, when I come down to it, not only am I considering the party politics here and the LP itself, but also I used to be in YAL, and I
Yeah.
was
I'm
and
a member of YAL, but you won't catch me defending them all too often.
yeah. So YAL taught me a lot about the inner workings here, because wouldn't you know it, every single organization, with very few exceptions, at those events at the YAL conferences, and every single organization and associated organization they would support would be fucking conservative.
Yeah.
And if you look at that, hey, it's almost like conservatives bought the LP and also all associated liberty movements.
It is interesting that, just as an aside, not part of the debate, it is interesting that you mentioned that the first article bashing the Caucus was in Reason. Like, looking in hindsight, wow. Like,
yep. Now they're hardliners. It's almost like a slow infiltration. So
no,
yeah,
I agree all that happened. I agree it was bad. I agree what the Mises Caucus was tried before by the Radical Caucus.
So my point in bringing all that up, by the way, was just to say that this is not a new problem, and
no,
it's not a thing of the Libertarian Party, because it siphoned votes to the other parties, like Republicans especially. The vast majority of libertarian people end up transitioning to either supporting Republicans in principle, like massively boosting, like Rand, Amash, Massey, all these right-wing figures, or just outright avidly supporting Trump, like the Liberty Hangout invasion chose to be, or a variety of other groups, all siphoning people from liberty to republicanism, and doing it with the effective attempt to get a libertarian future through republicanism. So ultimately, when that happens, what you're saying is that it's okay for a movement which is trying to get more people on board to be co-opted by these forces, or at least that it doesn't matter that it happened, because you still think it's possible to use these fixtures which have been co-opted in order to get these results, which it consistently doesn't.
Okay, but would you make the case that both the Libertarian Party and Liberty Republicans, the Pauls, Thomas Massey, Justin Amash when he was in Congress, would you argue that they brought more people from liberty to the right than they brought from the right to liberty?
Probably.
I have to strongly disagree. I think,
and the reason I say that is because a lot of the people who claimed to have been brought over from more right-wing circles to the liberty movement, a lot of those people which claimed that suddenly ended up doing things like the GOP Mises Caucus, and also suddenly started saying that it's okay to co-opt and adopt fascist monikers and support fascism. It's almost like, that's why Lou Rockwell eventually ended up posting Daily Stormer link to his site, because, he was the one actually responsible for those Ron Paul newsletters. And those Ron Paul newsletters brought a lot of people to the right, because they brought in right-wing rhetoric and were overwhelmingly in support of right-wing causes, which is why YAL would not include anybody as more libertarian than Ron Paul on their Nolan chart. I don't know if you got handed those materials, but you got the Nolan chart with Ron Paul right there at the tippy top. Right. So you know what I'm talking about.
No, I know.
All of these organizations are infiltrated, and they're all bringing people over to the right. And that's the reason why, when I went to a YAL convention while I was still in college, one of the things that really sort of stood out to me, and I didn't fully understand it until later, was that they had a speaker from the C4SS who had the audacity to come up and say, "I'm a left libertarian." He got booed by some people. He got disrespected by everybody. You could hear a pin drop. And that's the real shit. The real shit is that if somebody is a libertarian, they won't mind somebody who supports liberty but also identifies on the left. But so many people in this alleged liberty movement hate the left more than the state because they were brought over through right-wing causes and bought organizations, which means that they were going to end up that way in the end anyway, unless they did some significant soul searching and clearance of their own personal spooks.
I agree. What?
No, I was
Go ahead.
gonna say, okay, I'll let one person finish their point, and then
okay.
Listen, just make sure I'm actually moderating, and I will say, the problem is that they should do a quick Google search. I don't know about soul searching because that's a tedious process and a metaphysical one, but at least Google Pierre Proudhon, which I don't speak French obviously that well, and see who the first, because I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, from the perspective of who called themselves an anarchist first, Pierre Proudhon, who was on the left, did call it was the first one to call himself an anarchist. And Josiah Warren was the first American anarchist who was more of an individualist on the right. So I think it's worth noting the historical background.
Right libertarianism of the sort Kareem and I would identify with was essentially Murray Rothbard getting big brain and fusing like classical liberalism with that left-wing anarchism, which is where the liberty movement truly started.
Liberalism and leftism are fundamentally opposed.
Well,
I somewhat agree, but I somewhat agree, but I think that's kind of where we exist, is like at the intersection of the two in a strange way. But
I'll quote the simple phrase I heard when I was listening to a podcast on Benjamin Tucker, because I'm trying to get more Benjamin Tucker works. From my perspective now, and this wasn't always the case until meeting Jeremy and looking into it, this does not reflect either of the debate team people, but libertarians sometimes have forgot their left-wing or socialist roots, and socialists sometimes forget their libertarian roots. And I mean that from a historical perspective. When I think of right-wing anarchism, I think of mutualism, in some cases, individualism, and anarcho-capitalism. I guess you could argue mutualism fuses both in a sense, because Pierre Proudhon, to me, didn't necessarily say I'm a left or right-wing anarchist for historical context. That being said, Harrison, did let you get
I do.
Yes, he did. He was a socialist. That's leftism.
Okay.
I do have something to say about that. I obviously acknowledge some of the issues that have come with libertarianism being associated with right-wing politics. A lot of people came from the right and went back to the right. A lot of people still sort of think they're in the liberty movement, but Jeremiah and I have talked plenty about how we both don't really like a lot of the post-libertarians, but I will say I would definitely disagree that like the Ron Paul campaign brought more people from liberty to the right than they brought from the right to liberty, simply because the liberty movement before then was unbelievably small. So effectively anyone who brought over, and there was tens of thousands of people, anyone who was brought over is a net positive, even though the movement kind of lost some steam, and with the Trump campaign, a lot of libertarians moved rightward again. I still think that's a net positive for the movement and provides a model for how we make more libertarians.
Yeah, definitely that can make sense. If the nice thing about this is that I have found is some people are individual minded and some people are collectivist minded in different cultures and different places. And probably what you can do is show the people who are more individualist minded, the individualist anarchist philosophies, people who are collectivist, the more collectivist ones. So that I see what you're saying there. What would be your rebuttal to that, Jeremiah? Or do you want to take a second?
I mean, my chief rebuttal would probably start with alienating some people in my own camps and yourself as well by telling you that Benjamin Tucker, Josiah Warren, and Lysander Spooner were all socialists. They were all socialists, and individualist anarchism is a leftist framework for anarchy. That's what it always was. That's what it was always supposed to be, and that's why they were all members of various socialist groups and or methods of thinking. And ultimately, for instance, Lysander was a member of the IWW, if I remember correctly, and like a lot of different socialist organizations existed for a significant period of time to form the basis of these sorts of things. Like individualist anarchism, the point of that isn't that we're all capitalists. Mutualism, certainly not. It's not it's a myth that mutualism is a fusion of capitalism and socialism. It's not. What it is it's a brand new economic model based on lack of usufruct and specific property like use and like domain to avoid people hoarding it and demanding rent in the same way that the state hoards property and demands taxes. It's a way to avoid mimicking the state in our private affairs. That's what mutualism is, and it comes from a socialist tradition. It was never supposed to be capitalist at all. So, like, let's be super clear about that. And then let's also talk about the fact that American libertarianism and the people who started to call themselves that from a capitalist perspective more appropriately started with people like and I mean specifically the capitalist class, by the way. I'm not talking about all of it, but like because that started like 19th century territory, but like the people who called themselves capitalists and supported that anyway, they would be more like Albert J. Nock and Rose Wilder Lane and the people affiliated with those people, which is why Rothbard credits them for the root of American right libertarianism.
I think the proper origin of American libertarianism in the right-wing sense, like the right-wing free market capitalist sense, really has to be put mostly at the foot of Rose Wilder Lane and Ayn Rand. Honestly, like that's where that comes from.
I'll say Rose Wilder Lane because Ayn Rand hated libertarianism and she was a cunt. So
I agree on both counts, but I think she mainstreamed a lot of those ideas, and it was under her reign of popularity that the word started to become something that lots of right-wing Americans used.
But not because of her, because of other people who were writing these ideas before and congruent to her. She stole a lot of ideas and then claimed other people stole ideas from her.
Oh,
yes.
Like without Nathaniel Branden, she wouldn't have been shit.
Okay, fair enough.
Rest in peace, by the way. We were Facebook friends right up until he died. He was a much better person near the end.
That's interesting to hear. What I will say is this: with the series of rebuttals, is yes, people can have the functional, I guess, lifestyle or works that do promote certain systems, but then you can also see how they actually carry out and then determine that. Just to break that down, I think we credit John Zerzan with coining the term anarcho-primitivism. But I think if you really wanted to argue, and you can make a good case for this, that Henry David Thoreau essentially started that in a sense. Not that he coined the term, but he had that sort of lifestyle. Looking at that from a capitalist perspective, I think it's a little bit difficult to determine who initially started the ideas for private, because there's people who did different functions of it. I'm not even opposed to saying Spooner was a mutualist as well, or different things like that. But
socialist.
I call him a mutualist, but that's where I'd go with these rebuttals. Is if you want to consider who started it, look at the first initial functional private capitalist who actually made it work.
Okay, well, we can't do that because that exists way too far back in history. These models had been modeled for a long time before anybody slapped a label on it, and the label capitalist itself was created in order to insult people who were bitches and abusive pieces of shit. So
fundamentally, the word capitalist was created by leftists as an attack on the upper class. So the capitalism being like an ideology that real people identify with is a fairly modern phenomenon.
Yep. Yeah, and like also ultimately, like, the reason that capitalism had such an impact on all of this stuff instead of the alternative is because people like Murray Rothbard were doing what a lot of libertarians hate me doing these days, and using the term state capitalism and saying that we're differentiating between state capitalism, which has always existed, and free market capitalism, which is a theoretical concept that we can potentially do in order to combat the state. But his argument was basically that the way things have formed has been by governments coming in, plundering an area, controlling it, and distributing those resources. He wrote that in an essay which was included in many like sort of early panarchist libertarian zines where they were trying to bridge the gap. And he like this was very unique to a lot of libertarians, because a lot of libertarians just wanted to pretend that capitalism was responsible for only good things and only awesome things, and that it was an example of the success of capitalism when something went right, and an example of no, that's just corporatism and it's not real capitalism when it went wrong. And that dishonest framework allowed a lot of Republicans to hijack a lot of things by saying, no, we're just doing a capitalism when we install Pinochet. We're just doing a capitalism when we fuck with Venezuela. We're just doing a capitalism when we embargo Cuba. We're just doing a capitalism when we fight Russia with Nazis and the Mujahideen.
So much of the left-right paradigm has to be viewed through the lens of this was kind of some bullshit that Americans made up in the Cold War. Like a lot of it has to be analyzed in that way. I do think we've strayed, not to be the moderator here, but we've strayed from the proposition here.
Well, I don't think so, because I think
let's actually get all about
slow high. But that's what I'm saying, though. I think this is all on subject, and the reason it's all on subject is because the people who we do remember weren't using political action. The people who we do remember eventually realized that political action, or just started with the realization that political action would be ineffective to these goals. And Bakunin is a great example, because even his suggestion that we shouldn't have a transition period at all got him kicked out of the Union. That should tell you everything you need to know. Basically, he was the first person, like in anarchist circles, to get kicked out for supporting Boog. So the general vibe should be that, like, everybody who actually did something radical didn't need a radical caucus. And the radical caucus failed because it wasn't radical enough, because it was a caucus. And so when you realize that caucuses, politicking, they're maybe going to change a few things to get you a few concessions while the elites build their systems anyway. That's all you need to realize, because it's had the most historically repeatable and consistent pattern of that being the way it is. And because ultimately, when you get these small concessions, they keep people on board to a system that not only are they throwing money at, but they are throwing money at it in a futile manner, because the people with the most money in their pockets can still sway an election. So any election that matters, any election that they actually can change things in, the rich will still hyperfund that candidate. That candidate will do the most spending and get the best results every single time, with very few exceptions.
I do acknowledge that, but just... Okay, I want to be clear on a couple things. First of all, with regards to the small concessions, I agree that that is not a path towards lasting liberty, but would you condemn them outright? Would you see would you see that sort of thing as bad? Because I still see that
I
as
don't
being
condemn either of you outright.
I'm just saying that when we gain a small concession, people are more free, and that's a good thing. I don't view
They're
that
not
as
more free.
Are they not? Okay. This isn't a small concession. It's a fairly large one, obviously, but the abolition of chattel slavery, that is a concession from the Okay. The reduction in total chattel slavery, right? That's not. That isn't that's not our end state, right? We would still advocate for, far less aggression in the world, but it is a positive development, right? I think when people are more free without that institution. So I don't believe incrementalism is a long-term answer, but there is still such a thing as being more free versus less free, and more free is better. That being said, that's not actually my argument in favor of politics. The argument is that yes, getting people elected, making these incremental changes, that's not what's going to make us free, and that's not why politics is valuable. It's valuable because we can convert people. That's always the case. So,
which I already contended with, but go ahead.
I suppose I just disagree, because it was a political campaign, converted more people to liberty than any other event in our lifetime. And there were some problems with it. And yes, we lost a lot of those people, but we still have a healthier liberty movement now than before that campaign.
Do we?
And nothing else we've done compares to that transition. And yes, I do genuinely believe the liberty movement is healthier now than it was before Ron Paul ran for president. I don't think that's genuinely in doubt. I think there were problems that came with that, but having the fact that there are thousands upon thousands more people who identify as libertarian is a good thing, and it makes the movement stronger.
So to your first point, actually, I'll answer this one first. I already, sort of contended with the idea that this has brought more people to the liberty movement. And the reason I contend with that, even as being one of the people who participated in the Ron Paul campaign and helped him in I think 2012, if I remember correctly.
Right.
What I noticed was that I was helping a Republican, and the way that I got actual campaign materials was always affiliated with a Republican organization pushing other Republicans. So giving those organizations money gave them more money to give to other candidates. Okay, moreover, that money that goes to those candidates is consistently pushing their agenda, and they get that anyway because they're already billionaires, and that's what the Caucus is all about. So that would ultimately...
But they do get that anyway, so you didn't hurt anything by your participation in that.
Or you hurt things by putting your money and power into these sorts of election campaigns rather than just doing things yourself. Why are people spending so much time at campaigns, setting up booths, doing little runs, having their signs and their protests and we're going to sit in the middle of the street? Why would we do that when we can just go and fund better alternatives? Why would we do that when we can go and use that time to work on better alternatives? It doesn't make any sense from a praxis standpoint.
Well,
and
I do see...
while I'm also saying that, I can also say that the co-option of all of these things is what has led to this point. Because the ultimate truth here is that these politics are just that. They're politics. And when you end up with these sorts of things, you're ending up telling people that we need a certain amount of government, or we need to use government in X, Y, and Z ways, instead of training them to say none. And that's just going to get them with whatever the closest government form would be. And so that close government form to what these people are trained in, which is conservatism, will be republicanism. And that's why so many of these people at net have switched over to other parties, have
Okay,
started
I
supporting
guess
Rand Paul or Massey or Amash or any of these other people
that
that have been like boilerplate Republicans or
but that's
Trump or
but that's the
generally
case but
Republicans in
that's the
general.
case for the LP.
It's the case for,
That's why we built the LP, and I would agree that it's no longer good to work within the Republican Party through Republican institutions. That's why we have to build our own thing. And as to it being co-opted, I think I already kind of my case is still that any effective liberty institution will be infiltrated. That's just what that's just what the left does. Like it doesn't matter that it's a political party per se. Anything that happens like that is going to be infiltrated.
okay, so if anything that happens like that is going to be infiltrated, then we might as well not throw money at the thing that's going to be infiltrated the fastest because of its existing inroads through political mechanisms.
Okay. Let me put a question to you then. Do you think there is a more effective way to convert libertarians?
Yes.
Or do you disagree? Okay. First question. Would you agree with me that converting libertarians is one of the first most important things we have to do?
It depends on the kinds of conversion and whether or not they are reliable, because
Okay.
ultimately
Yeah,
a lot
I
of the
guess I agree
ways
with that.
libertarians are converted. Hey, like, let me just bring up an example. You saw that stream between Ace and I, where
Yeah.
we went over the fact that there are a bunch of bigots coming at people for even suggesting supporting trans people. And,
Yes.
you know, accusing us of wanting to mutilate children's genitals or calling us pedophiles or a wide variety of things for supporting any of them, even just adults. So ultimately, that's what a lot of libertarians had become. I have been unfriended, blocked, or just unfriended myself. So many people who would just rather insult me in that way than, you know, have any sort of libertarian future at all. And that's what a lot of these people have attracted, because they came from these very conservative modalities. On the obverse, there are lots of people who came to liberty from more left-leaning mentalities, but those left-leaning mentalities were people like Vaush, who are objectively bad for any sort of liberty, you know, or Destiny, or any of these people who have been, like, you know, flirting with the Libertarian Party. And like all these people suddenly came in and acted like if we didn't do exactly what they wanted, and acted like if we didn't do exactly what they wanted, we were some terrible oppressor. And so there's stuff from both ends where, like, yeah, there's some problems in the left, but the overwhelming problem is in the right. And the overwhelming source of these problems is political action to begin with, because you're getting the same people converting these people who didn't understand it to begin with. Like, it's sort of like drafting people for the military, you know? Because like you're dealing with real young people most of the time who don't know what they're talking about already. You tell them who the enemy is, you put a gun in their hand or a drone controller in their hand, and you tell them, get them. And you don't say much else, because you know that you need that lack of information in order to get your particular agenda through. And it's sort of that way with a lot of these training young people, getting conversions, etc., because they get people in on the ground floor with lots of, like, essentially blue-pilled conservatism, and then occasionally with like blue-pilled, like, soak dem stuff. And a lot of these things will end up with people who were converted, but really just, like, they're still loyal to the existing structures and systems. It's not going to result in any sort of progress to just rely on numbers and conversions. What you need is to see long-term success and make sure that these people get, like, stay where they are, because it's like a rom-com, you know? You get to see the end where they kiss and everything is hunky-dory. You don't get to see how that relationship built on dysfunction goes. There's no, you know, 2 weeks notice 2. There's no like how to lose a guy in 10 days 5. There's no any of that. You don't get to see how all these dysfunctional relationships worked in the end run. You just say, well, that ended nicely, I'll leave it there in my own mind. And that's what a lot of these conversions are. We got one person to sign up for the LP, and we're going to add that to our numbers no matter how our long-term growth looks. And hey, if you look at the recent numbers, long-term growth ain't doing great.
No, I totally agree that like there is a problem with like the recruitment of people who aren't principled enough, and that happens.
And the principles of the recruiters.
I would say it happens in three ways, where it happens on the right with like people who are socially conservative and hate the left more than they hate the state or more than they love liberty. It happens on the left with people who like sort of won't abandon like certain leftist authoritarian principles and who are basically here to like use libertarian means to fight the left-wing culture war. And it also happens, I would say, in a third way through the Beltway, where it's just people who like might think they're free market, but are just fundamentally too blue-pilled to be useful. But none of that is unique to politics. Any method you use to bring people in, if the messenger isn't principled enough, you're going to bring in unprincipled people.
But how do you get principled messengers from an unprincipled existing system which has been banked on lack of principle?
I would reject the assertion that the parts of the liberty movement that engage in politics are automatically like
I didn't say automatically
conflate them. I would
but
disagree
I did say
that
the system is broken.
Yeah, no, the system. I would agree with that, and I just don't think that like all parts of the liberty movement that like work within that system can be conflated with the system.
But it's still the system.
I guess I just don't think it is. I still see.
Why not?
Like, well, the system clearly doesn't see like the LP as part of the
system.
system.
Sure it does. That's why it's so good at filtering people from the LP to the Republican Party.
Yes, but well, there's times where the LP has perhaps been part of the system, but they clearly have been threatening enough at times that the system distances themselves from that.
Or it was a minor concession to get pressure release.
Well, I don't think it does release pressure because it makes the system look weak when they have to attack something as seemingly hopeless as the LP. But just from within, bad messengers isn't unique to politics.
But why does politics provide a better vehicle for good messengers than anti-politics? Why is it not better to start from the principles of anti-politics for messaging? Because that's what we're trying to discuss here if we're discussing messaging as the vehicle.
Politics is not a better place to start for messaging. It is a better platform for messaging.
Why?
And so because it reaches more people, because people care about it.
Why do people care about it?
Because they're indoctrinated. But that's the point, is we have to unindoctrinate them. We can't not reach out to anyone who's already not working within our frame of mind.
Right. I reached out to you fine though without that. Like, I didn't need you to totally agree with me. We're in a debate for a reason. And somehow I didn't need to run for office to get here, did I?
Yes, but it's completely different anarchist to like libertarian Ancap. Like, I'm already close enough to you that I can see a certain amount of value in conversing with you.
One of my most common commenters on my YouTube videos who constantly likes them is an avowed socialist Democrat.
Okay, well, that's a good thing. But you have
and it's regular too.
You haven't actually convinced them then, right? Like they're still not on our side.
You haven't convinced somebody either if they're stuck in the Cato Koch Institute kind of mentality.
I totally agree. I don't count that as a win. Okay.
Then I count all my other wins as a win.
Yeah, well, and I've convinced people to be, based in red-pilled libertarians too. Like, I count that as a win as well. I'm saying at some point we have to look at what is best at converting people. And I look at it from my personal experience, right? As being this sort of person and going about my everyday life. If I go out into my community and advocate for this sort of thing, just as I am Harrison Wells and you should all listen to me, the default answer is, who the fuck are you? Until I say, I'm Harrison Wells, I'm with the Libertarian Party, and this is why you should listen to me. Just having that political element to it makes people more interested. And that's dumb and sucks, and I wish things weren't that way. But that's how you have to communicate about political issues to people who just don't understand the world in the same way we do.
You know what I do? I don't start with my name. My name doesn't matter.
Okay.
What I start with is an issue. I bring it up in like a store or something, or on the bus, or any number of other places, and I just bring up an issue, and I funnel them toward the anarchist solution. And I say, well, if you want to learn more, you can find me on my website. And a lot of people have done that. I've done that successfully by stating my name last, because I'm the least important element here.
Okay.
And I've gotten a significant amount of people on board just by doing that. And I do it online as well. I don't need the political end of it to do the same thing you're suggesting. So if you want to talk about things not being exclusive to politics, I could also say that doing this approach isn't exclusive to politics either.
That's all good. And issue-based activism is a good thing. But all I'm saying is, like, you can once you attach it to politics, you can signal boost that issue-based activism. Like, I'm not saying you
only
can't
if people
do
are
this.
willing to fund you.
I'm not
and
saying
if
you
those
can't
people
do
are
this
willing to
without
fund
politics.
you, then they probably benefit from your message. Why do they do that? Maybe it's because there's a part of your message that would still benefit the billionaire class. Or because you don't get enough funding for your message to begin with, making politics an ineffective vehicle for change to begin with. Because people are throwing money at a candidate doomed to fail, and that candidate, when that candidate fails, is going to lose to a candidate who made more money, spent more money, and got in. Because, as Open Secrets has repeatedly proven, people get in based on campaign spending, not based on votes, which means you may scrape a few people over, maybe, but you scrape those people over at the expense of telling the other people that they must participate in the system. So how many people are you scraping to your side versus shunting to the other side? That's what needs to be rationally assessed, and a rational assessment that most Libertarian Party members aren't willing to do, because it starts to make them look bad.
Yeah, but we also can't bring in everyone, right?
I didn't say we could.
But we can't count
Which you bringing in more.
Basically, I would look at it this way: like, people we bring in are a win, but people we push away aren't always necessarily a loss. Like, some people are always going to be in that blue pill mindset, and so, like,
okay,
working within my local party, right? I'm not funded by the Caucus. Like, all of our money come from donations from local people. And
great. How many of your local party have won?
What's that?
Great. How many of your local party have won?
We haven't run candidates yet. We just started this year. I started my local party. And we will run candidates, and I'm not sure they'll win. I would love if they did, but, like, I'm not sure,
because very likely the money is going to fuel politics here, just like it does everywhere else, and the money that people sent to those politics could have gone to a different thing, which is how I was going to answer your first question in that two-question part, by the way.
And the system will be set up against us in a way that our candidates are less likely to win, and I fully understand that. But fuck off. My brother's being a fucking gay bitch. But where was I? Oh, yeah. If I run those candidates and none of them win, but I convert people, A, I've done something positive. B, I know from experience.
Better keep tabs on those people.
Oh, for sure.
You have an exit survey?
Yes. Well, I do not have one yet, but we are setting one up for where, like, I'm going to set up an exit survey where I keep track of the people who come into the orbit and make sure they stay within the Libertarian Party. I fully plan to keep track of people who come over to my side.
Because most people don't. Most people aren't willing to see which they're going to, and how long they're staying. Most people just say, "Hey, we got numbers, and these numbers are great, aren't they?"
Yeah,
and then they don't look at all the money that could have gone to other places.
If we don't win, I don't care how many votes we got. Votes in and of themselves are not a measure of success unless you've actually won something and are then reducing the size of the state.
But you don't reduce the size of the state. The LP has never reduced the size of the state. The state has consistently grown during its whole course.
Which is why I'm not advocating that as our path forward. Votes are not going to be my measure of success. My measure of success is going to be how many people do we get interested in libertarian principles, and can I keep them engaged? Through online platforms, right? I can interest people in liberty without necessarily connecting myself to the LP. But like in person, in my local community, no one talks to me without politics as
maybe I just have a higher. You play D&D.
I feel like I know what you're about to say, but yeah.
Maybe I just have higher charisma than you.
Maybe you just have higher charisma. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Maybe I'm just not very good at this. But personally, I'm not sure that's wrong, but like, I think you would be pissed at this, but I genuinely think more people would listen to you if you hadn't disengaged from the political system. And like, you're kind of the example of how much this works, because so many of these anarchists who don't vote, which I don't have anything against them, like, voting is not the important part of politics to me. Running campaigns and then bringing people in is. So I don't care if you don't vote. But like, you came in through the Ron Paul campaigns and Young Americans for Liberty. It's great that you are where you are now. It's better that you are where you are now. But you got there by starting with politics. And that's how almost everyone starts.
And now I'm forming new frameworks for addressing these things without any politics at all, and getting some interest in that regard, because people are tired of politics, and politics are old hat. The new shit is trying to find ways around politics, and that's what I'm here for.
And I would never dissuade people in the liberty movement from doing that. And I think that the actual mechanics of how we make the country free, that won't happen through politics. But most people need politics if they're ever going to get there.
And those people who need politics will probably end up supporting right-wing candidates. So generally speaking, you're not making a great point here. I was supporting politics since I was in high school. And if my mother had never mentioned the LP to me or libertarians, I would have stayed basically fascist. That's where I was. And ultimately, I became interested in this because my mother suggested it to me. It wasn't because it was a party. So if my mother had suggested that I start looking into libertarian philosophy instead of libertarian politics, if she had recommended somebody like Caucus to me, my mind would have probably been equally open to what he was suggesting than to what at the time was Gary Johnson was suggesting, because I started there.
And I get that, but are you willing to acknowledge that you're maybe unique in that if your mother suggested you read Konkin, you would have totally been like, yeah, I'll just go do that, and then you would have ended up an agorist. Like,
if I'm unique in this regard, then I need to impress upon parents to raise their kids better so that their kids would trust them to an extent.
To some extent, I'm there as well, in that like I'm interested in the ideas, and I like if I had to choose right now, do I want to be involved in libertarian politics or libertarian philosophy? Only one for the rest of my life. I take the philosophy. That matters more to me.
Then why are you spending more time on politics right now?
I don't spend more time on politics than philosophy right now.
Where's your Where's your local libertarian philosophy club?
My local libertarian philosophy club is non-existent because I can't convince people.
One. Say Keybase.
Yeah, well, okay, yeah, Keybase. My
but local. That's not local.
Yeah, I don't have a local libertarian philosophy club,
one.
And that's And that's my entire fucking point. Is because
Or
I couldn't actually
because you
get
haven't
people.
started one.
Okay, here's the deal. I will try, and I'm not even joking, I will try earnestly as hard as I can to get people engaged in a local libertarian philosophy club, while at the same time
Call it
trying to
LAN,
get...
Libertarian Action Network, because
Okay,
that's
yeah,
what I'm
sure.
suggesting. And
I'll
that's
do
how I
that.
would have answered the first part of your other two-part question
I
series.
will
I will
try.
give that long answer when you're ready.
I will try to get people involved in that at the same time, trying to get people involved in the LP. We'll see which one I get more people to. I will prefer that follow-up. That's way more fun to me. But people, the average person, is not motivated by that and will not get involved with that sort of thing. That is something
Because they
unique to,
don't think it works, and you need to show it works. If you're not willing to show it works, then you're part of the problem, because people aren't seeing that it works.
People don't think about that issue that deeply.
They don't think about that issue that deeply because they don't see it as a potential to think about it.
Okay, yes, I agree with that. But most people are in a frame of mind where the only way you can get them there, the only people you can get them to the Libertarian Philosophy Club, is to start them through libertarian politics.
That's not the only way. I'm getting plenty of people there without the politics entirely.
I didn't say that's the only way. It's not the only way for everyone. Okay,
so how many people versus how many people?
Well, in my local community of 6,000, which is obviously basically nothing, I could probably get 0 people to a libertarian philosophy club right now, whereas I've gotten 6 to the Libertarian Party. So
then instead of calling it a libertarian philosophy club, prove that the philosophy works through action. The 3 A's of agorism are agorism, anarchy, action. It's action that counts the most. That's what it is. And so this is my long answer to your other 2-part question, which was like, 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Because like I remember everything, and I'm annoying about it. So this 2-part question, you asked, the first part of your question was, what would be a better way to do this? And my answer is very simple. Instead of donating to a political campaign, instead of donating your time, effort, and energy to that political campaign, or to politics in general, instead of helping people do flyering campaigns for that, you build a local direct action community. Start to grow food on your own property, so that you can trade with other neighbors in this network. Try to build a local resilience community where you're watching other people's kids when they're not home so that they can go take care of things and they don't need the state to hire babysitters or schools. Like have action networks to put out people's house fires that doesn't rely on a fire department that's 800 years away. Or deal with crimes and break-ins that's not 200 miles away, like the cops are all the time. Do all of these things while encouraging a general mentality of militia and mutual aid and defense, so that when there is a threat, like, the evil Ruskies, you can just say, well, we've already got our training and we don't need your help, government. Do all of this, do all of it regularly, help people with their disabilities, help people with their health care, get people what they need directly by direct and mutual action, rather than putting all this time, effort, and energy into politics, which all this time, effort, and energy into politics will only result in like a minor fraction of anybody getting in who's on these tickets, because the people with the purse strings are going to win. So you're throwing time, effort, and energy into things that don't work. And the reason I'm saying all of this, like, ultimately is that if people have a third option in the form of, hey, Republican versus Democrat, and then the Libertarian Party is that third option, the people who are pressured in this area might go over to this area, right? But that's because it's the third option and the only third option. The fourth option does not exist yet in your community by your own admission. So if you made that and gave people the option to ditch politics entirely and instead put their time, effort, and energy into this like actual genuine third option, which doesn't rely on the same mechanisms as the first two, then people who are frustrated with the first two might be able to bridge the gap. That's not going to happen unless the option exists, though, and you admitted you started this one, or this one right here, before you started this one. So, of course, this one is going to be closer to these two, and these two are going to have more ability to transition people to this one. But ultimately,
that's true.
if you don't have this one even as a fucking option, people aren't going to say, I'm going to choose that, because they don't have that. And you're not giving them that, and they don't know why they should want that. So if you told them why they should want that, gave them that, and literally did that, that would be agorism. That would be using the gray, black, and occasionally white market instead of pink or red like politics use.
Okay, I actually do like all of that, and I would totally take you up on trying to start something like that. Like, it'd be hard for me personally because I have there's a cultural gap between me and the people of my community. Largely because I'm in a community run largely by a church that I don't attend. But like I would absolutely take you up on that. But
you should have more conversations with Christian anarchists if that's the case, so that you can get ways to bridge the gap between you and those people.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a good thing. Like, look, I would be interested in taking you up on that. My personal opinion, obviously, since I'm on this other side of the debate, is I don't really think I'd be able to actually get very many people to do that.
It depends on which you put more time into. It's which wolf you feed that wins.
I don't think, given equal resources, that aid network would bring in as many people as the party.
Well, you got to get equal resources. That means you've got to get equal amounts of people donating to it. You've got to get equal amounts of foot traffic. You've got to get equal amounts of...
Yeah, but that's the issue. Is trying to get equal amounts of... If we're trying to get the same amount of resources for this other thing, then we have to get as many people interested in that thing. And there's no structure for us to do that through,
because you haven't built it, and because it doesn't exist, because so many people have been building the existing structure with an alternative veneer.
Yeah, but there's a structure that already does exist that people already
understand.
And is
anti-libertarian.
Okay. I don't disagree that obviously I don't disagree that the state or politics are anti-libertarian, but nobody, like, there has to be something that people understand that brings them to the philosophy
speak louder
that
than
then
words.
brings them to action.
Like, if you're feeding the homeless, they don't need to understand the deeper philosophy to hand a homeless guy a bowl of stew you made. Food Not Bombs does it every day. Why aren't you working with them?
No, look, that sort of thing does work in terms of making people more free. I don't think that actually works all that well, which, by the way, that's always been my point, is that those sort of things work to make people more free. And politics... not them specifically, but I have done that sort of thing.
But for a libertarian organization?
For a libertarian organization, yeah.
Okay, awesome. What was that? Let's talk about that.
That was an aid network that was essentially tacked on. Actually, it's a great example. It was an aid network that was tacked on to the Libertarian Party of Yavapai County.
So it was designed to funnel people into politics, and that's why it worked to funnel people into politics.
No,
but if you worked to funnel people into anti-politics,
the idea was for it to work the opposite way.
But it didn't do that, did it?
The aid network would not funnel people into politics. The politics funneled people into the aid network, and that did basically work.
But that made it a recursive and self-feeding machine. People were funneled from the politics into the aid network, which funneled back into the politics. It was a way for outreach to happen for the politics.
Yes, but it also
So
serves as an...
you could have the same effect with the outreach feeding into anarchy. And then it could be recursive there too, and you could build the system anew and afresh for liberty.
I don't think it's as easy as you're making it seem to just
It's
build
not
these
easy.
external systems.
It's not easy. That's the reason I don't have the money to do it, so I'm not doing it quite yet. I'm trying to build my capital, but like ultimately you have the capital and you have the interest for libertarian action, and you're putting it in politics rather than this anti-political
Because
agency.
if I was putting it into the anti-political agency, all the interest I have would dry up.
Why would it dry up if you can recursively self-feed the machine in the same way that you were doing before? There are homeless people, right? You feed those homeless people and you get the same effect.
Simply because like the aid network wasn't bringing anybody in, right? That was just a good thing to do.
Well, no, but you said it brought
But,
people in. You said it was recruiting people for the party and recursively helping get outreach for the party.
No. Okay. If I said that, I misspoke. That wasn't what it was doing, and that wasn't what it was for. It was just a good thing we could do. That didn't bring anybody.
So you didn't have your name in. You didn't have your name in any of the materials.
We did have our name in. It wasn't an effective recruitment method.
Okay, so based on that, we know that this wasn't an effective recruitment method at all. Nobody saw your name on these things and said that, well, then why was it attached to a political organization if it wasn't an effective recruiting mechanism for the political organization? And why would somebody who was just advocating Ayn Rand argue for altruism, and these people were just doing it out of the kindness of their hearts? You weren't. You were doing it for outreach.
First of all, that is a straw man. I did not advocate for Ayn Rand.
You did say that she was at the roots of libertarianism, even though she hated him.
I did say that she was part of the root of American libertarianism. That being said, I fundamentally
she disagrees with you.
I know she disagrees with me, and I disagree with her on that, among many other topics, such as...
Why do you disagree with her on that?
I am not anti-altruism.
But why do you disagree with her on that?
Why do I disagree with her that she was not...
And how can altruism exist?
Okay, define altruism.
Doing something with the expectation and existence of nothing in return.
Yeah, okay. That's... Okay. Perhaps we weren't doing it altruistically.
Okay? No, you were doing it for your self-interest as an outreach mechanism.
I'm sure some people were, but yes, I'm sure whoever thought of that and made it up.
When's the last time you did it?
That would be, months ago, because I don't live there anymore.
Okay, when's the last time you did it here?
I've not tried that here yet. I
can't try that here, but try that here as a way to recruit people for your action network.
I can't get people interested in participating in that with me because they're only interested in the politics.
Because you haven't asked them if they would be willing to do some volunteer work helping the homeless.
I literally have. I have asked people
if you put up a bulletin board saying
we don't have homeless here, but I've asked people if they would be interested in doing volunteer work as
issue.
Yeah, but no, you can do volunteer work in a different way.
What issues exist in your area?
What issues exist in our area?
Yeah.
Really oppressive zoning, super high, unusually high property taxes, a social conservative nature that gets enforced by the state. There's we have policing issues.
Okay, so
a lot of nepotism.
So mostly there's not very many issues. And so if you didn't have a way to convince these people of these issues but politics, why would you have a way now? Are you just going on the Trump versus Biden thing? Are you making it macro? How are you getting numbers now?
With those issues. Yeah, we are recruiting based off both of those issues, but also my main thing that I use to recruit within the county is a more positive vision of, hey, you might feel like you don't have issues now, but we can make this community free through nullification.
Free from what?
Free from incursions by higher levels of government.
Why do those incursions exist? What have politicians like brought up as issues they should solve?
What's this? I missed like half of it. I got why do those issues exist?
And then like what are politicians saying with regards to how these issues can be resolved?
Okay. Obviously, like those issues exist. I'm not sure I quite understand you, but those like the issues exist because they're being imposed by the federal government.
Oh, so
And
federal government,
what-
not property taxes then, or zoning laws. Those aren't federal.
Oh no, like okay, I'm running against those issues, but the main thing, I guess I was not articulate in what I was saying earlier. The main thing I'm running on is that we can nullify higher orders of government, such as the state and the feds.
Oh, so you're trying to say that
as
long as you elect our people, we'll keep this place the way it is.
No, that's not true either. Like, I am running against the local issues, such as zoning laws and issues with policing. But I am also running against, we're going to go further than just removing the local government's incursions on your liberty. We're going to then try to nullify against higher orders of government
how are you gonna do that, and how are you gonna do this nullification based on a small county?
Nullification almost always happens at the county level
of a federal thing.
The federal government uses their federal law if local authorities are not cooperating.
That's not nullification, though. That's resistance.
Okay, so call it. Yeah, well, if local government, right, is actively not cooperating with federal edicts, those federal edicts cannot be carried out. That's what we're essentially running on. Like
but you could do that without doing politics at all. You could just say, "Hey, we can all just say no."
Yes, we absolutely could do that, and no one would get on board.
Why not?
I do that because they don't understand.
Then they won't understand now.
They don't understand how to solve what they see as political issues without politics as the medium. So
how are you solving these
them,
problems with politics?
I just told you how we would solve these problems with politics. Right now, the problems aren't being solved at all. What? Yes.
By saying, okay, so you can say no without politics. That's not exclusive to politics. Why did earlier I have to account for the lack of exclusivity and now you don't?
No, because listen, I absolutely could, right, in theory, convince the community to do what I want to do without working through the political process, in theory. In practice, that's less effective than doing it through politics because people dismiss it when it doesn't come through the political system. And that is effectively my case, that people have to be approached through the medium of politics because politics is what they understand.
How many federal laws in your local area have been nullified successfully already?
Absolutely none. No one's tried yet.
So ultimately, what you're trying to do is do an equally experimentative thing to what I'm suggesting, and mine is the one that doesn't rely on the existing control mechanisms of force.
I would disagree with the assertion that they're equally experimental.
Because
I'm active. Simple. Because I'm actively experimenting with both of them, and I am already seeing the results. Not in terms.
But you haven't actively.
Not in terms of laws nullified, but in people who come over to our side and are then interested in that message. Make sense?
But you haven't tried the Action Network.
No, I have not. I have not organized a formal network.
So here's my recommendation then for your Action Network.
Okay.
You start it up. You tell as many people as possible, hey, come over to our Action Network. We're doing cool shit. You'll get people moving there like they did the Free Keene project. Run it exactly like that model. exactly
Okay.
like that, but without the politics. So do it like that. Say, move to our area. Our whole goal is to say no. And if you get enough people to move there, and like that ends up being the way things are, you'll probably end up with some homeless people who are tired of being oppressed in their area simply for existing unhoused. So you'll probably get that to feed too. You'll probably get to demonstrate how to house the homeless and get them off their. You'll probably be able to demonstrate like anarchist upward mobility relatively quickly, because if you build it, they will come. You have built a party, you have not built an anti-party. So
Okay.
if you build an anti-party, they will probably come flocking to that anti-party, and they will probably come and say, hey, yeah, I'm interested in saying no too. If all we're doing is coming here so that we can live free and say no without the need of politics at all, that sounds like a great deal to me. Sign me up. I'm buying a house. There are plenty of rich people who would probably do that. There are plenty of poor people who would probably do that. And then the more people who did that, the more people would be isolated to your side because they would see practical effects, or they would see a state oppressing people just for wanting to be free by saying, we're not going to let you say no.
I will commit here and now to attempting to grow both the Libertarian Party of Apache County and the Free County Project of Apache County Mutual Aid Network. I will make an earnest attempt to attract people through both of these methods, and we will see what people actually engage with. And I actually think that's a pretty good ending point.
Yeah, I want to thank you guys both. I really, really did enjoy it. I can actually see it from both sides. And for me, it's interesting because I kind of started with the perspective I don't want to be political, but then I did take to some door knocking, and I do plan on running some campaigns in the future. That being said, there are people like Eric July, Larkin Rose, who have converted a lot of people and who have had very successful projects without ever having to step foot in the political sphere. Whatever you think of them or not, they've had great success. And Larkin Rose has some crazy success, just showing people that government is, in fact, a non-secular religion. That's huge. That's a huge stepping point. I will say the Ron Paul campaign is the reason, I think, most of the reason why we're here, because Ron Paul converted a lot of people and still hold him in high regard. So I can see both sides of the coin. Maybe even more so, since Pierre Proudhon coined the term anarchist, I would have to say there are millions of people who identify as anarchists, just from the simple fact that even if it's 1 or 2%, that's hundreds of million in 7 billion people. And it's probably even more than that. With that being said, though, I don't know if there's a 100% answer or if there ever will be a 100% answer to this, but I think we can work both sides and see what happens. Life pretty much is an interesting experiment, and I think we can come at it both ways and see what's the most profitable way to actually go through all of this, what will actually work. Because ultimately, I think it's interesting to experiment with both of them. If you have a toolbox, you can play around with all of the tools, whether that tool is a political action community, whether it's volunteering, whether it's creating a new album, creating a music video, talking to groups of people, your Toastmasters, whatever it is, use that tool. Pull that tool out of your toolbox and see if it gets more liberty. If it doesn't, put the tool back, try another tool. I think that's functionally how most of us go through life. You try something. If it doesn't work, then you try a different method and see what yields results.
Which is the stage I'm at.
Yes. And I think it's everybody's at. And I think really that's what we're going to have to do. And that's just part of the human experience. And not just politics. With everything, I'll end this with a quote. The notion of anarchy means that once the industrial functions have taken over from the political functions, then business transactions and exchange alone produce social order. Pierre Proudhon. So with that being said, thank you, gentlemen, very much for this. I'm Kareem, your host of the Essential Libertarians. This was Insanity is Free, Jeremiah Harding from Agorist Nexus. Go check him out there. And if you're excited, go ahead, donate to his Patreon, which I did, or to his Subscribe Star if you're not a fan of Patreon. You can also find Harrison Wells as well. Harrison, where can we find you?
At HW Liberty on Twitter.
All right. And you can find me at Kareem for Liberty. And if you enjoyed this debate as well, if you do want to take a look at the Mises Caucus, you can at lpmisescaucus.com. I'm Kareem, your host of the Essential Libertarians, giving you the tools for self-governance, whether it's agorism or anarcho-capitalism. I will see you in the next one. Thank you very much, everyone.